Hi, I am Tom Daly. I'm a partner at Roca Rothgerber Christie, and I practice in the intellectual property practice group.
And I'm Drew Wilson. I'm an attorney at Roca Rothgerber Christie, and I also practice in the intellectual property group.
And today we're going to be talking about various different ways that you can protect the outward appearance of a product.
The products that work best with copyright are products that have some artistic element that's conceptually separable from the product itself. So, for example, the dancer or ballerina that's a part of the base of a lamp, that dancer or ballerina is separable from the lamp. You can have a pole and the lamp works just fine. Whereas something like the Coke bottle wouldn't necessarily be separable because it's just one unitary unit. If there was artwork on the Coke bottle, that might be separable. We should note that a recent Supreme Court case, the Star Athletica case, has really clarified and broadened a bit what actually is conceptually separable. There was a question for a long time about the designs on clothing, if that was conceptually separable from the clothing itself, and the recent Supreme Court decision has said yes. There are a number of advantages of copyright over other forms of IP. Copyright is one of the most powerful tools that a company has in its arsenal to protect its products. Copyrights give the advantage that if you've filed for and obtained the registration before infringement begins, you can obtain statutory damages of up to $150,000 per infringed copyright, which can be very powerful when damages might be hard to calculate. You can also file your copyright with Customs and Border Protection and have the government help prevent infringing goods from coming to the country. Copyright is also somewhat unique in other forms of IP in that when you sue, there's a attorney's fees shifting provision built into the statute. So very often you can get an award of your attorney's fees when you're suing to enforce your copyright. Yet another advantage of copyright is that it's very, very inexpensive. You can get a copyright registration for a $35 filing fee. Compare that to a trademark registration that's $275 per class to the government, not to mention the attorney's fees, or a design patent application that can also run in the thousands of dollars.
It's also a relatively simple form that you fill out for copyright. It's available online through the Copyright Office. It's 2 pages. So it's not as difficult to go through the process of trying to obtain protection. And even though it has a limited term, it's still a relatively long term of protection for copyright.
And on the registration form, one of the advantages too is if you're trying to protect something like a photograph or an unpublished work, you can register multiple at the same time. So even that $35 fee is actually even smaller.
So there are some disadvantages when you want to take a look at copyright as a way of protecting your trade dress or the appearance of your product. One of the issues is that you're going to have this the idea that whatever you're trying to protect is conceptually separable from the product itself. So that means that it could be very difficult. One of the things we think about is whether or not you can protect, for example, a Coke bottle with copyright. And the answer is probably not. If you had some artistic work that was depicted on the Coke bottle, you could probably protect that with copyright. Or if you had some kind of a sculptural add-on to the Coke bottle, you could protect that. But you can't protect the bottle itself. It's just not creative enough for the Copyright Office.
It's very tempting for people to want to rely on copyright to protect their product. Don't get me wrong, copyright is an incredibly powerful tool, but there are some disadvantages to copyright. For example, in order to rely on copyright protection for your product configuration, the thing that you're trying to protect has to be conceptually separable from the product. Another disadvantage of copyright over other forms of intellectual property, particularly trade dress, is that there's no guarantee of injunctive relief. There's no guarantee that a court will enjoin the infringer from selling the infringing product. You may end up with a royalty or some other payment, and that might not be what you want.
So if you're relying on copyright and you want to get a copyright registration, there's a question of whether you need to get one. And the reality is that you have copyright protection without having the registration. As soon as you have your original work fixed in a tangible medium of expression, you have copyright protection. But if you want to actually enforce that copyright protection, you will need to pursue a registration. You either have to have a registration issued to be able to sue for infringement, or you have to have applied and there has to be a final decision by the Copyright Office that they are not willing to give you a copyright registration, in which case you can then readdress that with the court when you bring your litigation. Okay, so there's no set time for filing for your copyright registration. You have copyright protection just by virtue of being the original creator of a work and having it fixed in a tangible medium. But just because there's no time limit for it doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about pursuing it. There are advantages to obtaining a registration. You need to have a registration before you can sue, or at least have applied for a registration and have a determination by the Copyright Office that they're not going to give you one. So if you want to protect your rights, you are going to have to think about a copyright registration. Also, if you have a registration before someone begins infringing, that gives you the ability to get statutory damages and attorney's fees.
There are a number of benefits to filing a copyright registration early. Number one, you have to file a copyright registration, or actually have obtained a final decision from the Copyright Office as to whether or not they'll give you a copyright registration before you try to enforce your copyright in federal court. Also, if you have a copyright registration before the infringement begins, there are a number of advantages that you get in court. One is statutory damages, where you can get up to $150,000 per infringed work. This is extremely useful in things like, online sales, where you don't know necessarily what your damages might be. You also have the ability to have an attorney fees shifting if you've got a copyright registration. So you might be able to get your attorney's fees back when you sue to enforce your copyright.
You either have to have the registration first before the infringement begins, or within 3 months of publication.
That's right, Tom. Another advantage of having a copyright registration early is that you can file that copyright registration with customs, and customs will actually look at incoming shipments and try to prevent infringing products from entering the United States.